The Allies, formerly referred to as the United Nations from 1942, were an international military coalition formed during World War II, 1939–1945, to oppose the Axis powers. Its principal members were the Big Four. 1. The United Kingdom, United States, Soviet Union, and China. Membership in the Allies varied during the course of the war. When the conflict broke out on 1 September 1939, the Allied coalition consisted of the United Kingdom, France, and Poland, as well as their respective dependencies, such as British India. They were joined by the independent dominions of the British Commonwealth, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. Consequently, the initial alliance resembled that of the First World War. As Axis forces began invading Northern Europe and the Balkans, the Allies added the Netherlands, Belgium, Norway, Greece, and Yugoslavia. The Soviet Union, which initially had a non-aggression pact with Germany and participated in its invasion of Poland, joined the Allies after the German invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941. The United States, while providing some materiel support to European allies since September 1940, remained formally neutral until the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, after which it declared war and officially joined the Allies. China had already been at war with Japan since 1937 and formally joined the Allies in December 1941. The Big Three, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, and the United States, were the principal contributors of manpower, resources, and strategy, each playing a key role in achieving victory. Relations between the United Kingdom and the United States were especially close, with their bilateral Atlantic Charter forming the basis of their alliance. 234. A series of conferences between Allied leaders, diplomats, and military officials gradually shaped the makeup of the alliance, the direction of the war, and ultimately the post-war international order. The Allies became a formalized group upon the declaration by United Nations on 1 January 1942, which was signed by 26 countries around the world. These ranged from governments in exile from the Axis occupation to small states far removed from the war. The declaration officially recognized the Big Three in China as the four powers. 5. Acknowledging their central role in prosecuting the war. They were also referred to as the trusteeship of the powerful, and later as the four policemen of the United Nations. 6. Many more countries joined through to the final days of the war, including colonies and former Axis states. After the war ended, the Allies and the declaration that bound them would become the basis of the modern United Nations. 7. Origins. Main article, Causes of World War II. Following the First World War, the Treaty of Versailles, 1919, established the League of Nations in an attempt to create a system of collective security and prevent war. The League's covenant obliged members to protect the political and territorial integrity of all members against aggression. 4 of the major allies of the First World War, the United Kingdom, France, Italy, and Japan, became permanent members of the League's Council. The League, however, was weakened by the failure of the United States to join and by the cumbersome rules for enforcing sanctions for breaches of its security provisions. 8. 2728. France attempted to further protect itself against possible future German attack with the Franco-Polish Alliance, 1921, and the Franco-Czechoslovakian Alliance, 1924. 9. 1718 under the Locarno Treaties, 1925. France, Britain, Belgium, Germany, and Italy also guaranteed the borders between Germany and France and Germany and Belgium as defined in the Treaty of Versailles. 8. 94-97. The system of collective security was weakened when Japan withdrew from the League in February 1933, following the League's criticism of Japan's invasion of Manchuria in 1931. 8. 168-171. A further blow came when Nazi Germany withdrew from the League and the World Disarmament Conference in October 1933. 8. 198 in May 1935, France signed a mutual defense agreement with the Soviet Union, which Germany saw as directed against it. 8. 228-229 in October 1935, Italy invaded Abyssinia, and the League responded with weak, short-lived sanctions. 10. 78-82. Germany remilitarized the Rhineland in March 1936 in contravention of the Versailles and Locarno treaties, but Britain, France, and the League of Nations imposed no sanctions. 10. 84-91 Britain, however, announced that it would aid France and Belgium if they were the victims of aggression, and France stated that it would assist Britain and Belgium in the same circumstances. 8. 231 in July 1937, Japan began an undeclared war in China. The League found Japan's actions illegal and invited its members to impose sanctions. 8. 244-245 10. 135 in November, Italy joined the German and Japanese Anti-Comintern Pact, and in December it left the League. 10. 155. In March 1938, Germany invaded and annexed Austria in contravention of the Versailles Treaty. France and Britain issued formal protests but took no further action. 10. 186-187. Britain declined a Soviet offer to form a defensive alliance against Germany, and also declined a French request to provide a security guarantee to Czechoslovakia, which was subject to German threats over its alleged mistreatment of the German-speaking majority in its Sudetenland region. Instead, Britain continued its policy of appeasing Germany by putting pressure on Czechoslovakia to negotiate a solution acceptable to Hitler. 10. 199-203. As the crisis deepened, Britain, France, Germany, and Italy signed the Munich Agreement on 30 September 1938, whereby the Sudetenland was ceded to Germany against the wishes of the Czechoslovakian government, and the signatories guaranteed the territorial integrity of the rump Czechoslovakian state. 10. 282-285, 293. Germany invaded Czechoslovakia on 15 March 1939 in violation of the Munich Agreement. Subsequently, Germany increased pressure on Poland to agree to the transfer of Danzig, a free city under the Versailles Treaty, and the Polish corridor to Germany. On 31 March, Britain and France announced that they would come to Poland's aid if it were attacked. 10. 324-328 Italy invaded Albania on 7 April, and Britain and France responded by issuing security guarantees to Greece, Romania, and Turkey. 10. 329-339. 125 in May, France and Poland agreed to preliminary political and military protocols for mutual defense. 11. Britain and France also began negotiations for a defense treaty with the Soviet Union, but little progress was made. 10. 323-324, 351-359 on 22 May, Germany and Italy signed a military alliance known as the Pact of Steel. 10. 342. The governments of Germany and the Soviet Union signed a non-aggression pact on 23 August, which included a secret protocol for the partition of Poland. 12. 34-35 2 days later, Britain signed a military alliance with Poland. 10. 367. Grand Alliance. Further information. Diplomatic history of World War II. Formation. A 1940, Poland first to fight. U.S. envelope design printed in support of Poland following the German invasion of the country. On 1 September 1939, Germany invaded Poland, and on 3 September, Britain and France declared war on Germany. The Soviet Union invaded Poland from the east on 17 September, but remained officially neutral in the war between Germany and the Western Allies. 12. 56-57-87 Italy, Japan and the United States were also formally neutral in the conflict. 12. 73-75, 79-83, 87 Although Italy eventually declared war on Britain and France on 10 June 1940. 13. 116. Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and Canada declared war on Germany in the 2 weeks following the British declaration. 1328, an Anglo-French Supreme War Council was established to coordinate military decisions, and it first met on 12 September 1939. 383 by 1 October, Warsaw had fallen and the Polish government had escaped into exile. 32-34 following a lull in fighting between Germany and the Western Allies, Germany began its invasion of Western Europe in April 1940, quickly overrunning Denmark, Norway, the Low Countries, and France. Poland and these other occupied countries, with the exception of France, subsequently established governments in exile in London and were recognized as allies. France formed a Free French administration under Charles de Gaulle, which was not recognized as a government in exile until 1944. Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and Greece also established governments in exile in 1941. 14. The first inter-allied meeting took place in London in early June 1941 between the United Kingdom, the 4 allied British dominions, the 8 governments in exile, and Free France. The meeting culminated with the Declaration of St. James's Palace, which committed the signatories to work together until victory was achieved and an enduring peace secured. 15. 140-145. On 22 June 1941, Hitler broke the non-aggression agreement with Stalin and Axis forces invaded the Soviet Union. 13. 190-191. Britain formed an alliance with the Soviet Union in July, whereby they agreed to assist one another by any means and to never negotiate a separate peace. 12. 284-285. Note 1. The following August saw the Atlantic Conference between American President Franklin Roosevelt and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, which defined a common Anglo-American vision of the post-war world, as formalized by the Atlantic Charter. 16. 236-239. At the Second Inter-Allied Meeting in London in September 1941, the Soviet Union joined the other allies in adopting the Atlantic Charter. 15. 147. On 7-8 December, Japan attacked American and British territories in Asia and the Pacific, resulting in the U.S. entering the war as an allied power. 13. 250-256. China, which had been resisting a Japanese invasion since 1937, formally declared war on the Axis on 9 December. 17. The Big Three and Big Four. Winston Churchill called the association of the United Kingdom, United States, Soviet Union, and other allies the Grand Alliance. 18. The Big Three, the United Kingdom, United States, and Soviet Union, were the principal contributors of manpower, resources, and strategy, each playing a key role in achieving victory. 1920. The United States also saw China and its leader Chiang Kai-shek as its main ally in Asia, and considered it one of the Big Four allied powers. A view not always shared by the United Kingdom and Soviet Union. 2113. 510. Declaration by United Nations. In December 1941, at the First Washington Conference, Roosevelt proposed the name United Nations for the Allies and Churchill agreed. On 1 January 1942, Roosevelt, Churchill, and representatives of the Soviet Union and China signed the Declaration by United Nations. The following day, representatives of 22 other Allied countries signed the declaration. The Free French were not invited to sign because the United States recognized the Vichy government in France. 16. 251-257. The 26 original signatories 22 were United States, United States; United Kingdom, United Kingdom; Soviet Union, Soviet Union; Republic of China, 1912-1949, China; Australia, Australia; Belgium, Belgium; Canada, Canada; Costa Rica, Costa Rica; Cuba, Cuba; Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia; Dominican Republic, Dominican Republic. El Salvador, El Salvador. Kingdom of Greece, Greece. Guatemala, Guatemala. Haiti, Haiti. Honduras, Honduras. British Raj, British India. Luxembourg, Luxembourg. Netherlands, Netherlands. Dominion of New Zealand, New Zealand. Nicaragua, Nicaragua. Norway, Norway. Panama, Panama. Second Polish Republic, Poland. Union of South Africa, South Africa. Kingdom of Yugoslavia, Yugoslavia. From this time, countries that adopted the declaration were considered allies. 23. Mexico. The Philippines and Ethiopia adopted the declaration later in 1942, followed by Iraq, Brazil, Bolivia, Iran, and Colombia in 1943, and Liberia in February 1944. Following the liberation of France, the French Provisional Government signed the declaration on 26 December 1944, and France officially became one of the Allied nations. 11 nations adhered to the declaration in early 1945, when an Allied victory over Germany was assured, and the Big Four powers were preparing to invite signatories to the San Francisco Conference to prepare a charter for the new United Nations organization. 24. Major conferences. Wartime poster for the United Nations, created in 1941 by the U.S. Office of War Information. A series of conferences between the major Allied leaders, diplomats, and military officials shaped the strategic direction of the war and the post-war international order. Churchill and Roosevelt attended the First Washington Conference, December 1941 to January 1942, where they established the Combined Chiefs of Staff Committee and agreed to prioritize the European and North African theaters in the war. Churchill and Roosevelt met again at Casablanca, January 1943, and Washington, May 1943, where they decided on an invasion of Sicily, the postponement of a landing in France until May 1944, and began planning a counteroffensive against Japan in Asia and the Pacific. At the First Quebec Conference, August 1943, Churchill and Roosevelt agreed to a new command structure in Southeast Asia. 25. Churchill, Roosevelt, and Chiang met at the Cairo Conference, November 1943, where they discussed operations against Japan and issued the Cairo Declaration outlining their vision for post-war Asia, whereby Japan would lose all the territories it had gained since 1914. Stalin declined to attend or send representatives as the Soviet Union was not at war with Japan. 26. Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin met for the first time at the Tehran Conference, November-December 1943, where they decided that the full-scale offensive in France in mid-1944 was the Allied priority, and where Stalin announced that he would declare war on Japan once Hitler was defeated. At the Yalta Conference, February 1945, Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin agreed to zones of occupation for the soon-to-be-defeated Germany and made plans for the post-war settlement of Europe and the United Nations Organization. Following the Allied victory in Europe, the new U.S. President, Harry S. Truman, and new British Prime Minister, Clement Attlee, attended the final summit of the Big Three leaders at Potsdam, July-August 1945, where they discussed the final operations against Japan and issued a demand for its unconditional surrender. 25. Cooperation and tensions among Big Four. Three men, Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill, sitting together elbow to elbow. The Allied leaders of the European theater, left to right. Joseph Stalin, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and Winston Churchill meeting at the Tehran Conference in 1943. Relations between the United Kingdom and United States were especially close. 16. Roman 12 Note 2. Before they were formally allied, they had cooperated in a number of ways, notably through the Destroyers for Bases deal in September 1940 and the American Lend-Lease program, which provided Britain and the other allies with war materiel from March 1941. 27-28. The British Commonwealth and Empire obtained about half of the $42 to $50 billion in Lend-Lease aid during the war. The British Commonwealth, and to a lesser extent, the French Empire and Soviet Union reciprocated with a smaller reverse Lend-Lease program worth about $8 billion. 2930. After the United States entered the war, the United Kingdom and the United States established a combined Chiefs of Staff 31 to harmonize military planning, and combined boards to coordinate shipping, raw materials, and war production. 32. Churchill and Roosevelt also met 9 times in conferences without the presence of the other Big Four leaders. At the first Washington Conference, held soon after the United States entered the war, they agreed that Germany should be first defeated before focusing their forces on Japan. 16. 252. Nevertheless, divisions between the United Kingdom and United States soon arose over strategy for the defeat of Germany. American planners pushed for a landing in France in 1942, followed by a full-scale invasion in 1943. Britain, however, argued that an early invasion of France risked being repulsed with heavy Allied losses. Instead, they argued for weakening Germany through strategic bombing and economic warfare, and dispersing Axis forces by opening fronts in French North Africa, Italy, and possibly the Balkans. The United States and United Kingdom ultimately agreed to delay a full-scale invasion of France until May or June 1944, which angered Stalin because the Soviet Union was suffering heavy losses on its front with Germany. 3216. 285 287, 366, 537-33. There were also significant disagreements between the United Kingdom and United States about the Asia-Pacific front. While Churchill prioritized the recovery of British imperial possessions such as Burma, Malaya, Hong Kong, and Singapore, the Americans were more focused on supporting China by reopening its overland supply lines from India through the Burma Road. 3216. 417. Roosevelt and Chiang were hostile to imperialism and pressed Churchill to reach an agreement with the leaders of the Indian independence movement and to agree to post-war mandates for British and French imperial possessions to prepare them for full independence. 16. 269, 442, 444. Despite their ideological differences and severe tensions over the timing of an invasion of France, the Soviet Union and its Western allies cooperated in a number of ways. On the political front, the Soviet Union signed the Anglo-Soviet Agreement in July 1941. 16. 213 endorsed the Atlantic Charter in September. 15. 147 signed the Declaration by United Nations in January 1942. 16. 257 the Anglo-Soviet Treaty in May 1942. 16. 285 and the Four Powers Declaration in October 1943. 16. 380 in May 1943, Stalin agreed to dissolve the Comintern as a gesture of goodwill. 16. 362 on the strategic front, the Soviet Union, United Kingdom, and United States agreed at the Tehran Conference of late 1943 that an invasion of France was the military priority for 1944. 16. 394 on the military front. In August 1941, British and Soviet forces invaded neutral Iran, which they suspected was pro-Axis, to secure oil supplies and the overland supply route into the Soviet Union. 16. 212. The Western Allies sought to relieve pressure on the Soviet front by its strategic bombing campaign and economic warfare on Germany, and by diverting Axis forces to the North African and Italian fronts. 32. Western food and materiel aid to the Soviet Union was also of great importance. The United States supplied the Soviet Union with $10 billion worth of aid under Lend-Lease, equivalent to 7% of Soviet war production. 34. The Soviet Union, in turn, prosecuted the bulk of the ground war, in which an estimated 5 million Axis soldiers were killed or missing in action on the Eastern Front. 35. A rift developed between the Soviet Union and the Western Allies over the political settlement of post-war Europe. The Soviet Union pressed the United Kingdom and United States to recognize the territorial gains it had made in the Baltic states, Finland, Bessarabia, and eastern Poland before the German invasion. The United Kingdom and United States rejected these demands as incompatible with the Atlantic Charter principle of no territorial changes without the consent of the people concerned. 16. 278-285 U.S. and British concerns over Stalin's intentions increased when the Soviet Union severed relations with the Polish government in exile in April 1943, established a rival Polish Committee of National Liberation in June 1944, and failed to assist the Warsaw Uprising, August to October 1944, until it was too late. 36-16. 462-468. Nevertheless, the Big Three reached a secret agreement at the Tehran Conference to move Poland's eastern border to the Curzon Line, 16. 454-455, and in October 1944, Churchill and Stalin reached a private agreement over Soviet and Western spheres of influence in Romania, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, Hungary, and Greece, 16. 480-481. Despite their remaining differences over the borders and political future of the territories they occupied, the Big Three alliance held to the end of the war. On 8 August 1945, 6 days before Japan's surrender, the Soviet Union honored its commitment to enter the war against Japan. 16. 534. Three men, Chiang Kai-shek, Roosevelt, and Churchill, sitting together elbow to elbow. The Allied leaders of the Pacific War, Chiang Kai-shek, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and Winston Churchill, meeting at the Cairo Conference in 1943. Roosevelt viewed China as an important ally in the war against Japan and as a potential counterweight to Soviet influence in the post-war world. The United States saw Allied military bases in China as staging posts for an eventual invasion of Japan, and in the meantime, Chinese nationalist forces tied up 500,000 to 600,000 Japanese troops in central China. 37-16. 409, 410, 412. The United States provided loans and lend-lease aid to the nationalist government, and in December 1941, Chiang was named Supreme Allied Commander for China, Thailand, and Indochina. 16. 405. In October 1942, the United States and United Kingdom agreed to relinquish their territorial concessions and other privileges under their unequal treaties with China. 16. 410. In October 1943, the United States, United Kingdom, Soviet Union, and China signed the Four-Power Declaration, in which they pledged to cooperate against their common enemies and establish an international organization for peace and security. At the Tehran Conference later that year, Roosevelt outlined his vision of China as one of the four policemen of the post-war world. 16. 378-381, 408-409. Senior officials in the Big Three powers, however, were critical of the corruption and inefficiency of the nationalist government and its military forces. 16. 411-415. There were also strategic differences between Chiang, who wanted a higher priority on the war against Japan, and the Big Three leaders who had agreed on a policy of defeating Germany first. 16. 405. Relations between Chiang and his American Chief of Staff, Joseph Stilwell, were particularly tense. Stilwell believed the Chinese forces lacked adequate training, supplies, and leadership, while Chiang blamed Stilwell's insistence on diverting Chinese forces to the Burma campaign for the collapse of the Nationalist Army during Japan's China offensive of 1944. 16. 417–438. Chiang, standing with the other Allied leaders, was weakened by the poor performance of his army during this offensive, and by the U.S. adoption of the island-hopping strategy against Japan, which reduced the importance of bases in China. Chiang was not invited to the Yalta and Potsdam conferences of 1945. 16. 413–439. Major Allied states. See also Diplomatic History of World War II. Franklin Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, Joseph Stalin, Chiang Kai-shek and Charles de Gaulle were leaders of the Big Five. United Kingdom and British Empire. Further information. Military history of the United Kingdom during World War II and British Empire in World War II. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain delivered his ultimatum speech on 3 September 1939, which declared war on Germany, a few hours before France. As the Statute of Westminster 1931 was not yet ratified by the parliaments of Australia and New Zealand, the British declaration of war on Germany also applied to those dominions. The other dominions and members of the British Commonwealth declared war from 3 September 1939, all within 1 week of each other. They were Canada, British India and South Africa, 40, 150–151. During the war, Churchill attended 17 Allied conferences at which key decisions and agreements were made. He was the most important of the Allied leaders during the first half of World War II. 41. British Supermarine Spitfire fighter aircraft bottom, flying past a German Heinkel He-111 bomber aircraft top, during the Battle of Britain in 1940. British Supermarine Spitfire fighter aircraft bottom, flying past a German Heinkel He-111 bomber aircraft top, during the Battle of Britain in 1940. British Crusader tanks during the North African Campaign. British Crusader tanks during the North African Campaign. British aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal under attack from Italian aircraft during the Battle of Cape Spartivento, 27 November 1940. British aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal under attack from Italian aircraft during the Battle of Cape Spartivento, 27 November 1940. British soldiers of the King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry in Elst, Netherlands on 2 March 1945. British soldiers of the King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry in Elst, Netherlands on 2 March 1945. India. India was part of the British Empire. About 2/3 of the country was under the direct rule of the United Kingdom, exercised by a viceroy representing the British Crown. The other third mostly consisted of princely states, nominally under Indian rulers subordinate to the British Crown. 42. Nevertheless, India separately signed the declaration by United Nations on 2 January 1942–43, and signed the Paris Peace Treaties of February 1947 as an Allied power. 44. 163. 251, 273, 298, 322. India was an important supply base for Commonwealth, American and Chinese forces, and itself produced about £286.5 million worth of military equipment and other supplies. By 1945, the Indian Army numbered 2.5 million people, the largest volunteer army in history. Indian troops played a major role in the Burma campaign and in other theaters. Its military losses were about 100,000 killed, wounded or missing, and almost 80